Hi, and welcome to the Skeptical Leftist Podcast, the show where I talk to a variety of people to spread critical thinking, progressive politics, and left-wing philosophy. And today I'm joined by Matthew Remski. Thanks for joining me, Matthew.
Thanks, Corey. It's great to meet you, and very happy to be here.
Right on. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Conspirituality, and I've started listening to Antifascist Dad, your new show. So I'm glad I could get you on.
Yeah, great.
I guess to start off, we have to get a little bit of background, just in case people don't know who you are.
Sure. Okay, so born and raised Catholic, but in both like conservative and radical churches at different times. So that's been a very interesting experience to be able to compare those two things. Come from a union family. We always voted socialist. I've always been fascinated with and compulsive about writing, with maybe some neurodivergence probably on board. I've been through spells of like seizures and I probably have a touch of something called Geschwin's syndrome, which can lead to hypergraphia and an intense interest in religion. So that kind of figures with regard to what I've written about and done journalism on.
Right.
I was in college and within a year of graduating in literary theory and religious studies when I dropped out, partly because I met my first partner, but also because nothing made sense in terms of professional life. I was writing books of poetry and a couple of novels, but then I wound up spending like 6 years in cultic groups. And getting back into working life happened through working as a yoga teacher and doing journalism on cults, and that led me to Conspirituality podcast.
Right. Geez, 6 years is quite a stretch there.
It is, yeah. And I used to think of that with a fair bit of shame, especially because they fell right in this sort of developmental period of like, 22 to 29 or something like that. And so there was a lot of things that were stalled out because of that. But I also think that it took about 6 or 7 years for me to unplug from a lot of just basic, cultural conditioning. And so in a way, I was in some very negative spaces, but I was also outside of the, world of capitalist production. That wasn't my concern. And I was actually educated by both of these groups to kind of, laugh at that concern, not necessarily to change it, but to understand it as being absurd. And I think that was actually helpful for me at the time.
Yeah, I suppose I think sometimes that we assume that we're not like we're the immune to cult like situations, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that almost everybody could fall into that kind of situation given the right circumstances.
Yeah. I think there's this famous phrase of like, nobody joins a cult. They actually, delay leaving an organization that turned out to be lying about what it was. And so that's a sort of a good measure of how vulnerable people are. But also I'm kind of thinking more and more these days about like, well, in what ways did the cultic experience actually provide some sort of positive comparison to the outside world? What are the ways in which it modeled, collectivization or,
right.
socializing stuff or questioning aspects of nuclear family relationship. And all of that can happen in very destructive ways, but it can also happen in provocative ways, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like a lot of the hierarchical stuff that we have in mainstream society isn't really the positive stuff that we should be having.
Right.
So, yeah. So I guess the main thing that got me to message you for the interview was the book and podcast, Antifascist Dad. So I guess what got you going on that?
Well, I mean, people are still debating it, but as far as I can tell, we are in fascism or close enough to not make a difference.
Right.
So I'm a parent. I'm a dad. Trump gets elected for the second time, and my 11-year-old comes downstairs and asks, like, what's going to happen now? And I draw a blank until, like, I'm a writing person, so I just sit down and start writing a book that day.
Right.
And I started with an awareness of other influences out there with regard to answering that question that my kid brought to me. So on one side, we have the hellscape of the manosphere, like everything downstream of Jordan Peterson.
Right.
In the middle, we have guys like Scott Galloway, who has 2 kids, and he's worth over $100 million, and he has nominally Democrat views, but he really thinks that what boys need is a good pep talk for capitalism to get through this crazy period of the bad orange man. I think it's easy to see what Peterson is up to. I think it's harder to see what Galloway is up to. I think it's even harder to recognize what somebody like John Haidt is doing by ignoring the political conditions and awareness levels of the kids that he thinks are being ruined by social media, right? Like that's his answer, is like, oh, it's just Instagram is making everybody mentally ill. It's not genocide. It's not the climate. It's not, all of these other things. I think there's a very strong liberal parenting belief that if we get all of the kids' behavior right, if they're really functional, if they're productive, in terms of educational benchmarks, like that's most of the job. So I wanted to speak directly into that more genteel space where parenting is geared towards a conservative yearning for stability. And I also wanted to address something else, which was the age appropriateness of most principled leftist discourse. And when I say like age appropriateness, I don't mean in terms of content, because I think every kid can understand the basic, fatal flaws with ideas like private property and wealth inequality. They understand what genocide is.
Right.
What I don't think kids can grasp or should be able to really bear is the depression and melancholy and irony and dirtbaggery that runs throughout leftist discourse, right? Like for good reason, because we're generally sad people, and and I love that part of it. But one of the things I wanted to do is to sort of like brighten up the conversation by leaving behind the affect of decades of loss and exhaustion. Like I wanted to help, make navigating a world on fire without the assumptions of middle age about what can change and what can't.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, like being a parent and having radical politics, right?
Yeah, right.
I know, like my son is 22 and my daughter is 19.
Wow, right.
And I've tried, over the last decade or so to be like, progressive in various ways and radical in a variety of ways, but also let them build the blocks to be successful in their lives in the world that exists.
Right.
And it's a weird balance to strike, because I'm like, we have to tear down this system and do something different, but also go to school and get a job.
Right. Well, and communicating that that kind of irony or that paradox, I think is, I don't know. I think it depends on fostering a very deep, trusting relationship, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't say 2 things at the same time without the kid sort of really trusting that you're saying 2 things at the same time, because they're living the split world, and you're trying to take care of both sides, right? Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, I've got 2 stepdaughters now too, so
right.
And they're quite young, still going to school and still learning about like the history of Canada,
right?
And I'm often like, okay, but let's keep this into perspective about like the Indigenous people that were here beforehand.
Right. I'm sure it's slightly better than when you and I were in school, because there was no sense of the impacts of colonization in my grade school Canadian education. So yeah,
I seem to recall it still being very much like there was no one here, or they were quote unquote savages, right? And like we civilized them and whatnot.
And there were benefits eventually, and it might have been bumpy at certain points, but here we are, right?
Yeah. So I guess in regards to the book, like maybe it's basics, and maybe everybody already has an idea of what it is, but what is anti-fascism?
Well, practically, I think it's actually a great question, because I think there's a lot of different threads of discourse on it. Practically, it means learning to identify fascist behavior and then stopping it from spreading in various spaces, or protecting neighbors and the vulnerable from it when it does spread.
Right.
And that protection can be physical and spatial. It can take the form of, surveilling the local Proud Boys group. It can take the form of disrupting or, committing sabotage against online networks. But it can also be like community gardens and mutual aid food distribution and raising bail funds and, really living a good and connected and loving neighborly life.
Yeah.
But if we turn the question to like, what is fascism? I think there's two versions to really get clear on. And one is limited to resistance. And I think this is the liberal position of identifying fascism as a form of like mysterious political insanity that we should try to resist, but also put behind us. Like if Harris was president, says the sign, we'd be at brunch. Or,
right.
Like we have to get rid of Trump. There's no kings here. And he's an aberration. He's completely unexpected in such a country as the US. And if you're watching like Rachel Maddow, she'll tell you how not to obey in advance, along with Timothy Snyder, or to hold the line, or things like that.
Right.
And I think like all of that has immediate protective uses, but there's no real opposing vision offered other than the hope that putting the Democrats back in charge will nurture the kinder forms of capitalism once again. So that's one version.
Right.
And then I would say that the actual version, the real version of anti-fascism, says that Trump was inevitable, and to defeat fascism, we have to dismantle the forces that produce him. And so this version ties the rise of fascism to the history of colonialism and capitalism. And if the person you're speaking to is doing that, if the writer is doing that, they will be holding you as the reader with the statement, this rule from Aimé Césaire, who said that fascism in the global north is colonialism in its late stages turned inward. If they have that attitude, they will hold the axiom of Bertolt Brecht, who says in Germany in the 1930s, don't talk to me about fascism if you don't want to confront capitalism. So if the writer has that on board, they're going to have a structural analysis of what's going on and how to respond holistically. If they don't, they're going to characterize fascism in like psychopathology terms, like Trump is uniquely and aberrantly bad, but if we hold the line against him, this temporary madness will end. And I would say that like in practical terms, anyone can litmus test any book on the subject of fascism by finding it on Google Books and then searching the name Aimé Césaire, right? Because if his name is not there, or you could just put in Boomerang, right? If his name isn't there, then you're probably dealing with that liberal interpretation that's going to have a real limits. I think in a few years you're going to be able to, update that book test by searching for like Gaza genocide. Like I think there's going to be certain benchmarks along the way that will determine, is your reading of fascism, does it have teeth or not?
Yeah, I've had, I guess, a few arguments online about whether or not this is fascism, because some people, they have like pretty strict historical guidelines. They're like, well, there's no socialist uprising like there was in pre-World War II Germany, and I'm like, well, but that doesn't I don't think that necessarily has to be there.
Yeah, I think it checks too many boxes. Like I don't know if we're speaking about the same guy, but there is an influencer who has a fairly prominent position in, I think, the Revolutionary Communists of America or something like that. But he has a very strong, sort of very narrow definition that says, Trump has not led us into fascism because there hasn't been a robust communist movement that the capitalists have needed to enlist fascists to smash. And I'm like, I don't think like defining fascism by it the vitality of its opponent is I think it's interesting, but I don't think that when you line up all of the aesthetics, all of the cultural sort of qualities, all of the scapegoating, all of the conspiracy theories, all of the body fascism, I don't know why. I don't know what the purpose of the distinction is, right? Like it's bad. I think, to me, ultimately fascism is the end of politics. It's like irrationality. And if there's anything we can say about Trump and Bolsonaro and Milei, it's that they are completely nuts and just completely irrational. There's nothing, there's no method to the madness, and it just builds like this wave. And you can't argue with it. You can't convince them otherwise. You really have to build your own sort of like parallel, sane place. And that's to me what anti-fascism is about.
It reminds me of like years ago, I was out having a few beer with a friend, and we went to some guy's house, and he was a conservative, and we were talking about climate change.
Right.
And I had to roll it the conversation all the way back to like, okay, but how do you know what's true? Like, do you know what epistemology is?
Right. Because he was saying, I don't believe it, or
that's right. Like, and he absolutely would not accept any facts.
Yeah.
Because, and it seems like that's the same thing as like your Trumps and your JD Vances and whatnot. Like the facts, the evidence, nothing matters. They have no connection to that.
Well, yeah. And I think one of the things that I've really learned from Mark Bray, who's the, recently exiled Rutgers anti-fascism professor, he had to flee to Spain after death threats, is that one of the defining features of fascist rhetoric and propaganda is that it doesn't even have to appeal to sources or to any kind of body of stable knowledge. It doesn't care about the consensus. Right. It's the liberal argumentation is like, oh, this is why I think what I think, and this is how I hope to convince you. But once you cross over into fascism, it's like, this is what's true, and if you say I'm wrong, I'm going to kill you. Right.
Right.
Like that's the difference, and I think that's really good to keep in mind, because fascism is not about communication, it's about power.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little frightening, actually. I guess so. Also, Antifascist Dad.
Yeah.
How is the dad part kind of play into that? I guess we kind of talked about it a little bit, but
yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I should just make it clear that it's not exclusionary. Like it could have been anti-fascist parent or anti-fascist caregiver.
You just happen to be a dad.
I happen to be a dad, and I settled on it because I'm cisgendered, I'm heterosexual. There's a lot of discussion on what healthy masculinity means and looks like, and what sort of present or engaged fatherhood looks like. And so I wanted to enter that discourse really specifically, even though I think most of that stuff is all socially constructed and bullshit. So, but I do want to say, I did want to sort of plant a flag in that territory. And I think more broadly, I feel like fascism is intergenerational, and it never seems to go away. Like, there's no rank and file fascist movement in the 1920s without the trauma of World War I, and without 40 years prior of building communist revolutions across Europe that capital needs to put down to retrench its power. So that happens over a long period of time, and there's like lots of family stuff going on in the middle of it. There's a great song by Chumbawamba, "The Day the Nazi Died," and it references the death of Rudolf Hess in Spandau. He's the last Nazi prisoner, and he dies in 1987. And they sing that the neo-Nazis came out of the woodwork, and they're referring to them claiming his death was a murder, and they wanted to try to rally around it.
Oh, geez.
So that's 1987.
Right.
Like Hess dying in Spandau. And to me, this is just a very long story, and any long story is about families.
For sure.
I think that another point would be that typically fascism organizes through male dominance hierarchies, with older men driving recruitment for the younger men that they constantly need as shock troops or cannon fodder when it comes to war. My point is that I think we have to look at how that process is working on the other side, because in terms of parents and children, we have a lot of stories of kids receiving unconditional love and support from their elders in times of fascism. So the parents of Sophie and Hans Scholl of the White Rose, the parents of some of the Edelweiss pirates who launched this sabotage campaign against the Hitler Youth and security forces. They hid defectors. They put sugar in gas tanks. They screwed up supply houses, and they were badass. one of my favorite stories is from the Paivio family. Anu Paivio was a Finnish Marxist writer, journalist, and poet in Sudbury, Ontario. And one of his sons, his name was Jules. And Jules, at the age of 19, decides to go off to the Spanish Civil War with a brigade called the Mackenzie Papineau. And Anu, the father, leaves this poem behind about like how incredibly proud, but also incredibly scared he is for this child. But he also knows that he's written his child's sort of destiny into his heart in a way, because he's the one who brought him up with all of these Marxist values. And then his kid sees Franco bombing, Madrid, and off he goes. Right. And so, like, I just find that so powerful and so moving. Then Simone Weil, anti-fascist, autistic philosopher, basically was able to survive as long as she did because her parents always came in to bail her out. Like, she would get herself into trouble very regularly, including going to the front at the Spanish Civil War. And like, they wouldn't let her fire a gun because, she had these very thick glasses and they didn't really trust her. She was a little bit clumsy. And then she steps in a pot of boiling oil in the field kitchen and she has to be evacuated, but she went, right? And then she wrote about it, and then she wrote all of these inspiring things for her comrades, but her parents were there and was like, I think her mother said something like, may you never be the parent of a saint, because it's a lot of work, right? And today we have like the parents of Greta Thunberg, the parents of countless pro-Palestine and anti-ICE protesters. So the question is, how did that happen? Like, how did, people pass those values on to their kids or learn about them together? So that's kind of how it fell for me.
That's awesome. I think I've had this conversation with my dad a little bit. He's a pretty staunch conservative, right? But I always say to him, like, where do you think I got the values that I have? Like, they didn't come out of nowhere.
Right. Well, what are you talking about in terms of overlap? Like, just sort of notions of personal dignity or agency, autonomy.
Autonomy and even like care for your community. Like, he's a pretty staunch conservative, but care for those around you and the idea that you should share what you have and and work together with people. Like, those are things I grew up with. Even though his party doesn't really exemplify those things.
Doesn't do that. But somehow it fooled a bunch of people into thinking that it did.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very odd, but I always have the conversation always roots back to the values that I learned when I was growing up, and I try to pass on a lot of those values to my own kids. So,
I'm glad that you're able to have that really open channel with your dad. I feel very lucky. I just want to shout out my own dad here because he was a trained historian in Russian and Soviet history, and he came very close to getting his PhD, and then he wound up being a high school teacher because the job market was terrible. But like, to this day, I am running stuff by him. I'm asking for feedback. I'm saying, did you know that, such and such, and then he'll fill in his details, and we're sort of learning together. And it's just a really happy thing. It's one of the best relationships I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good when you can maintain that relationship for sure.
Right.
I guess to move on a little bit, like you've been doing Conspirituality for a little while, and you're doing Antifascist Dad now. So like, where's the crossover there? Is there any?
Yeah. So for me, I'm doing both still. And, I'm not going to go anywhere with regard to Conspirituality. But for me, Conspirituality is an observational project in which I was scrambling to catch up as a journalist, to catch up with the echoes of 20th century fascism in 2020 era internet chaos, COVID pandemic chaos, that ended up, brewing this online wave in support of Trump, with QAnon as this center of gravity and sort of catch-all conspiracy theory. And Derek and Julian, the three of us, had solid expertise in the wellness and new age space. And we knew how easy it was for that demographic to be red-pilled toward the right. From the 1970s, we knew that it had been nominally progressive, but either really politically disengaged or focused kind of like on neoliberal self-help, self-optimization, supplements and crap like that.
Right.
But it was also encouraging people always to become more flexible in relation to capital, right? Like, you just to become your best self, or follow your bliss, or whatever. Right. And it was like there was never any discussion of structural issues.
Right.
I think that oftentimes the strongest hook, and it seemed often to be benign, between this demographic and right-wing ideology, was between health foodism and bodily purity, in which people developed like obsessions around organic and natural foods and medicines. And that became very easy for people to slide into or mimic the blood and soil themes of a century before.
Right.
And so we're watching all of this, and we're sort of taking dictation on the fact that this is a group of people who imagine that our industrial, urbanized lives have destroyed nature for the benefit of the few, and therefore our bodies are poisoned, and we should cleanse and purge not only our bodies, but the evil elites who have done this. And so that was the story that we were working on. And it's not wrong. Like the at all. Like there was a lot of value in that, but there was right. something deeper that I wanted to get to, which is, this turning point between these two projects is really on the axiom that's about a century old, which is anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. So, in other words, when you get down to it, under capitalism, we really are bought and sold by elites. Like everybody in the conspirituality world is right.
Yeah.
We are only given as much resources as we can afford. We are lied to constantly in order to maintain some facade of, order or national pride. And so the question is, are you going to blame the wrong guy? Are you going to blame the Jew, the Palestinian, the trans person, right. or are you going to widen your analysis to reveal that like capitalism itself is either creating or accelerating these social pathologies? So I was able to address some of that on Conspirituality podcast, but the primary focus was keeping on top of the news cycle. And so Antifascist Dad lets me step back a little bit and focus on that diagnostic part.
Do a little bit more of a deeper analysis on that particular aspect,
on causes, on like, okay, well, why did this happen? Why did this happen? It's really sort of a two-part project, I guess, for me. They're very, very much connected, and I think they're going to work together.
Right on. Yeah, I know, like, for some of your content on conspirituality, you've talked about like Christian anti-fascism. Yeah.
Well, sometimes I'm trying to find overlaps between my fascinations, right? And I think that to study something like what influence has Christianity had over anti-fascist action over time is kind of like the underside of the conspirituality question, which is how do people use spirituality to do stupid things, right? And using Christianity as a ballast against fascism is the opposite of that, right? Yeah. And so, like, that's how I figure it fits in.
Yeah, for sure. No, I know I've quite enjoyed those episodes. I'm a non-believer.
Yeah,
but I find that when I think about like liberation theology and stuff like that, I don't know a lot about it, but like what I have heard, I'm like, yeah, I'm on board with all this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can say a little bit about, I've been very fascinated in liberation theology, if you just wanted to chat about that now. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's hard to understate the power of a revolutionary philosophy that comes from 19th century Europe and then sort of travels on the back of the colonial wave, and then winds up finding an organic expression in a religious culture in Latin America. That's what liberation theology is. And it's like, I think it's important to pay attention to, because it's a big mistake to not view religion as, just generally, as a landscape of struggle, just like any other, landscape. And because if you ignore it, you really cede the ground of religion to fascists. And and I also think it's a mistake to minimize the role that radical or liberation theologians have already played in anti-fascism and capitalism. So
for sure.
The thing about liberation theology is that most leftists are not going to find anything magical or metaphysical about it. Because its belief systems, although they're sort of linked intrinsically into Catholic faith, are quite materialistic. Mm-hmm. Liberation theology basically says that loving God and serving the marginalized are the same thing. They focus on the "this is my body" part of the Mass, of the Eucharist, because what expresses, Jesus knows he's going to die. He's with his friends. He's at the end of his life. He's done what he could to sort of speak some sort of truth to power into this colonized place, to give his friends a sense of hope, but also a sense of sanity and a capacity for resistance. He knows he's going to be killed, and he says, and he breaks the bread, which is like all that people have, and he says, "This is my body, and I'm going to give it to you." And that's the heart of like what our religion is about. And liberation theology really takes that up, because what expresses material engagement better than that? From a guy who's like unhoused, migrant, who's also God, because that's what we all are inherently, so they think, worthy of infinite positive regard. And that's why the CIA poured millions of dollars into propagandizing against liberation theology starting in the 60s.
Yeah, it's too powerful as an idea, I guess, eh?
Yeah, and for people out there who aren't Catholic or suspicious of Catholics, like, I get it. I grew up Catholic. I'm suspicious too. And if you are talking with a liberation theology Catholic priest, you're probably going to run up against, walls around reproductive rights or the morality of homosexuality. You might, and you might run up a barrier, other barriers socially, but then I think you're in the same political position that you're always in, which is, to what extent can you avoid or table that issue if you have the sense that you're working on some bigger thing together? And I just wanted to give this example, which is that I'm really interested in the work of this particular Jesuit liberation theology guy at the moment, who's getting a lot of media attention. He's an ordained priest. He'll probably at least be required to represent Catholic teachings on abortion and queerness if asked, even if he personally isn't on board with them. But if you watch somebody like this, you can kind of do some sort of harm analysis. Like, is he pushing anti-choice politics? Is he choosing to do that? Or is he simply not challenging that at this point? Mm-hmm. But in general, I would say religion offers anti-fascism a sense of hopefulness, secure attachment, longevity, a sense of inheritance. I think if we're talking about Christianity specifically, it gives the notion of a transformative or even meaningful death. I don't know if you've read a book. I don't know if you've read a book by Peter Gelderloos called "They'll Beat the Memory Out of Us."
I have not. No.
Yeah. So he talks about, it's an amazing book because he talks about how effective the state is at breaking up and suppressing movements and then making us forget about things that work, and how that can depress people in very terrible ways.
Right.
It's like you're a very small band of people who are protesting things, and the cops arrest half of you, a quarter of you wind up in jail. The rest of you are, dealing with the trauma of being kettled. And everybody kind of like forgets what worked and what didn't. There isn't like an intergenerational passage. And I think that religion, now Gelderloos doesn't say this, but I would say that religious institutions, even though they've worked in lockstep with the state often, there's always a militant flank of any religion that offers a sense of longevity and sort of intergenerational continuity. And I think that's rare to get, anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm like I say, I'm not a believer, but I often find myself in conflict with people who are like focusing in on, like, I was part of the atheist movement, the new atheist movement for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And I branched off of that because I saw too much focus in on like trying to debate and debunk people's belief systems rather than trying to address the material conditions that we all are living under.
Yeah.
And so like I find like as long as somebody's belief system leads them to a liberation type idea or set, or like, trying to improve the world, then I have no problem with them believing something that I don't believe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The proof is in the pudding. And I mean, it's been very interesting on Conspirituality because like Derek and Julian and I are just in different positions on this. Like Derek and Julian are atheists. I am not an atheist. I am agnostic, and I'm very, I don't think if you grow up as Catholic as I did, I don't think that ever leaves you. And that has left me right now with, I'm pretty curious about what Pope Francis and Pope Leo are up to. And they see, I'm very interested in that. But I think that they have these different flavors of atheism. Derek is more of a, you do you atheist. And, like you just said, if something leads you towards a really good social conclusion, then that's great. And I appreciate that because it reminds me of like how pervasive religious thought is in our culture, and how for somebody like Derek, like that can be really overbearing.
Right.
Julian is a little bit different. He's focused on deconstructing magical thinking and irrational beliefs, and I find that super useful as well. It's certainly been like a through line in our podcast work together. But I think there can be kind of like distrust points and mistakes from both sides. Like, one mistake that, let's say, the agnostic or religious person like me can make towards the atheist is somehow projecting onto them an internal state of blandness or dispassion, thinking that because they don't believe in something big, that therefore they don't have much to live for. But I've never met an atheist like that. I think that's a really bad way of, like, nobody is uncomplex. Nobody is not rich. Nobody is not full of passion. And then going in the other direction, I think it's a mistake to make assumptions about the inner lives of religious people, especially to infantilize them by imagining that everyone is a literalist with regard to scriptures or creeds. Like, I was raised Catholic, and from the time I knew what sex was, I knew that the Immaculate Conception was a myth. I knew it was a story, and I understood the good and bad uses of that story.
Right.
Like, you can be an asshole like Sam Harris and, pretend you understand Islam by cherry picking some Quran verses in English. Right. But then you know nothing about Muslim intellectual and political history. You don't know anything about Islamic socialism. And what he's doing is he's pretending that rejecting religion is rational. And I think my biggest problem with that is that for Harris and that entire crowd, they're not questioning the rationality generally of the world's dominant religion of capitalism. Like, that's not what they're spending their time doing. Yeah. And so, to me, the atheist who kind of needs to work on that is the one who believes that their atheism makes them a more moral or rational or ethical person than the religious person. And then just in terms of pragmatism, I think everybody has to acknowledge that atheists in the US are about 5% of the population. Like, they should be protected as minorities, right? But for those 5% who are worried about fascism, I would say that keeping atheist judgments and grievances on the back burner is probably best at this time, while figuring out which religious people are really good to work with, because they're out there.
It's kind of funny because one of the ways that I developed a more social justice oriented worldview
Yeah.
was through the atheist community. I learned about like religious privilege.
Yes.
And then after that, I learned about like male privilege, and then I learned about white privilege, and then and then I was like, this all makes perfect sense to me. Why would there not be like?
Oh, that's incredible. So they actually planted the seed of wokeness in you.
Yeah, that's right.
Incredible. I did not know that, because I have heard that term, religious privilege, because of course it's true. It's like if you're
Right.
if you're a religious person in U.S. political life, then that's a badge, right? A badge of honor. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. But then so many of the same people that know about religious privilege, they'll flat out reject any male privilege or white privilege.
Exactly.
And I was like, but
Yeah.
this all fits together so neatly. How can you reject this? And
yeah, I mean, it really comes down to what you feel you need to protect, right? Like, where you feel your power and dignity comes from. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. But I also wanted to ask you about like your views on feminism, because my views on feminism have evolved obviously since over the years. And I'm curious, like, were you always kind of on board with like feminism as we know it now? And how did that change as you became a parent?
I would like to think that I was feminist earlier in my life, but I've had to learn a ton and sort of really figure out what is in the way of me sort of taking on more of the historical understanding with regard to the power of gender.
Right.
I grew up in a very sexist time and place. It took a lot to start to climb out of that. And I thought that by the time I'd met my partner and co-parent, I had enlightened views on feminism. I didn't. I think I had a lot of internal beliefs about what I was supposed to do or how important my work was. I think that it's easy to get a kind of like baby liberal male feminism on board, which basically says, well, of course, women should have equal rights. Of course, women should be able to work. Of course, equal pay for work of equal value is a good thing. You might even go so far into supporting reproductive rights, but like, there's a lot that's underneath that with regard to notions of power and roles. And so I think the story for me is that the most radicalizing thing that has ever happened is becoming the co-parent of the father of an autistic kid. Because first of all, nothing shows you more quickly or harder what the capitalist world is than feeling all of the pressures to help the kid conform to it, right? And then you realize, oh, I don't want to do that, and then your life can change. But the other thing that it showed me was that because my partner had to pause her career to do full-time homeschool support for our kid, I got a crash course in the meaning and cost, physically, emotionally, and in every other way of unpaid labor, of social reproduction. I had a front row seat to, and I suppose I always did, but this opened my eyes, right? Like that's the kind of shameful thing about it is that I always lived in a world in which women caregivers were making everything happen. But this actually, forced me to reckon with it in a way that I couldn't ignore. So the unpaid labor keeps everything going. And it was so clear that capitalism has to hide it because it won't factor into like profitability models, right?
Right.
So capitalism offloads all of its environmental impacts, right? It's like we can ship our trash somewhere else, but then it conceals its social inputs. We're also going to conceal what actually makes it live. Yeah. And then when I was writing my book, I kind of figured out how, well, I didn't figure out, but like I just looked more deeply into, how are academics or statisticians looking at this issue of unpaid labor. And I found this study from Oxfam in the UK. They fight poverty by campaigning for women's rights primarily. So they asked a question in 2020, which was like, how much is the world's unpaid labor worth? And so the resulting study estimated that if every woman in the world above the age of 15 was paid the minimum wage for her unpaid labor, the total wages owed them would be something like $11 trillion per year.
Yeah, it's unbelievable number.
Okay, so that's more money than the combined revenue of the world's 50 largest companies, so Walmart, Apple, Amazon, and then 48, 47 below. It represents 1/10 of the total world economy of $100 trillion. And so it's the largest. So this is, I don't know whether it's a sign of emotional immaturity that I have to like bring it down to the numbers and say, but it's something very material about, and Marxist actually, about saying, oh, it's this amount of dollars. And so, the largest economy in the world after the US and China is a silent economy. It doesn't advertise itself. There's no conventions. There's no shareholder meetings. There's no trade agreements. There's no lawyers. The workers aren't unionized. It's invisible, right? And yet we see and feel this labor around us all the time. Like, women's caregiving work is the literal air we breathe. And so, like, I don't think you can really call yourself a feminist until you have a. Well, okay, I'll just make it about myself. Like, I don't feel I was really a feminist until I saw the structural landscape laid out in those numbers. I knew what unpaid labor was, but I didn't see it. I didn't see like the graph, right? And it's kind of like looking at the climate graph or something like that, the hockey stick. It's like, oh my God, okay, this is real now. That's a disaster. That's a disaster. And I'm sorry I didn't listen to everyone before. So so things have changed for sure. And I think it's essential to anti-fascism because fascism itself is misogyny, is a misogynistic movement. And so I don't think you can really I don't think you can do that. Trump is an aberration, and he's a pervert, and it's like, of course, he's and release the Epstein files and stuff like that, and sort of focus or offload all of that energy onto a few people. It's the entire movement which entrenches these deeply misogynistic structures that capitalism is based upon, and then accelerates them.
Yeah, it does seem like the whole thing has that misogynistic element to it, right? Like, they think women are less than, and that's just it.
Or that they are going to create a kind of, sacred identity for women that is based upon very carefully prescribed, gender binary roles, where you have, where your job is to be Erica Kirk or something like that, or to be Erica Kirk and have 8 children instead of just 3, or, whatever it is.
Yeah, like the Phyllis Schlafly kind of aspect of things, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious about, you mentioned healthy masculinity before, and I know there's lots of examples out there in the manosphere of what we would call toxic or bad versions of unhealthy masculinity. But what do we mean by healthy masculinity?
I think that the stuff that I have had to work on most with regard to masculinity is, undoing my own kind of patriarchal training. So that means working on patience, not projecting my needs for control onto the kids, seeing myself as a partner for them instead of a guide, not abdicating protection, but also not believing that I own anything or am owned stuff by the kid.
Right.
I honestly think that every view on what masculinity should look like has to be investigated really critically, because it's all socially constructed. Right. And I think assuming qualities or powers for oneself based upon gender usually means closing them off from women or queer people, or sort of assigning them an identity value that never really never really works. I think that where healthy masculinity and parenting two boys lands for me right now is that it almost feels like the primary doorway opens around coming down to discussing the world of sexuality and sexual behaviors, because we are completely surrounded by the objectification of bodies. Yes. And I think, and it's very noticeable to kids. If you have a open, good relationship with the kids, they'll be asking you stuff, they'll be talking to you about feelings, and that's all wonderful to nurture. But to note and to respond how the world of objectification impacts kids, I think becomes an open door to examining the fluidity and performativity of gender. Now, for us, or for me and our sons, that's involved in discussing positive and negative representations and seeing specifically how women's bodies are commodified. And I think that the idea that people can perform or be encouraged to perform or feel like they're forced to perform gender, it breaks a particular logic around essential identities. And I think ideally that leaves the kid with a sense that their task is to become a person, and that, attractions that they feel or ideas that they have around, what is beautiful or what is attractive or what a woman should be or what a man should be, that all of that is it's really just it's illusory, in the sense that what you're seeking for always is human friendly connection, and the world of objectification and gender stereotypes is kind of like it's sitting on top of that. It can be used in positive ways, and then it can be used in very destructive ways. But I think the fact that kids can recognize that this person is being asked to or is actively putting on a particular persona, and there's a difference between that persona and who they are, or even what they may be feeling, and to be able to see the difference or the space between those two things, I think opens the conversation of like performativity, which I think is the essential thing, right? Like I don't know what masculinity is. I know what I've been taught to perform, but in my soul of souls, like when I fall asleep at night, there is no sense of me being male or masculine or anything like that. I mean, I know I have the certain body parts, but it's very, very abstract. There's no metaphysical idea that gets attached to it. And I think if kids have an exposure to the notion of performativity in gender, then that series of thoughts becomes easier. And I think that that gender and its navigation becomes a lot less stressful, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I guess in a sense, like, it's like a gender masking in a sense. Like you always are putting on a show of being a man or whatever, right?
Yeah. And I think that the ways in which you perform gender, it's almost like if you figure out that, when I was a boy, when I was a Catholic choir boy, I was supposed to wear a tie like this, and I was supposed to have my shoes shined like this, and I was supposed to stand up straight like this. And if you really start to ask the question, what did all of those individual actions, what were they meant to convey? Then you can, as a fairly young person, you can say, I don't want to do that. Or if I do it, I want it to be a choice. Or if I do it, it's going to be cosplay. Or if I do it, it's going to be because I've taken on a persona in a video game, or I've changed my loadout in the lobby or something like that, right? or I want a new skin, in Fortnite or something. and so I think that if you have I think that doing that with gender probably gives a person access to doing it with other ways in which they're performing stuff, right? Like,
Right.
are you trying to please people? Are you being overly polite? Are you trying to fit in? Are you trying to, are you trying to influence people on the internet, right? I think that Judith Butler's sort of discovery of gender is something beyond biological sex that is aesthetic and cultural and performed, and that's a mystery. That's an amazing thing to make people aware of that, to make young people aware of that. I think gives a lot of agency and I think relieves the pressure of being trapped into let's grow up into a young man, right? Let's read Scott Galloway's books, Notes on Being a Man, right? To figure out how we should be a man. Like what does a man mean? By the way, he says it's provide, protect, provide, and procreate. Those are the three things that men should do, right?
So if you happen to be sterile, you're fucked.
You're fucked, right? Well, but also providing, protecting, and procreating are somehow more male than female.
Right.
It's funny because he undoes his argument throughout the book by continually referencing his mother, who's protecting, providing for him, and who obviously procreated him. Like his examples actually are all examples of unpaid labor, and so it's interesting. Like, kudos for him including all that, but like I don't think his book is saying what he thinks it's saying.
Yeah, I found like even the search for the idea of a healthy masculinity, it often, like you said, like it too often it seems to exclude women out of these categories that they are obviously in.
Yeah,
and
right. So I think it's like for a while I was hearing people say, okay, well, we've identified what toxic masculinity is. What is tonic masculinity? I'm like, oh God, that's no better. That's not going to solve your problem, right? It's just, all it's going to do is you're going to cherry pick a bunch of nice qualities and then attach those to masculinity, when really the differences don't make a shit of difference, right? It's like, maybe in combat sports, I don't know, but maybe not for long. It's not true on the battlefield anymore. It's like, where do these differences actually have material purchase? Like, I don't, it doesn't make any sense anymore. So
no, I even back before I was ever like progressive in any sense, like I was still always confused by this idea of like what a real man is. Like, it's a very strange idea to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's in a way, if you visualize it with a capital R and capital N, it's a thought terminating cliche, right? Like, I think everybody's baffled by it. It's kind of like somebody saying America with a certain tone of voice, right? It's like, well, what do you like? I think it's designed to be aspirational, but also a little bit threatening, right? And and you definitely, whatever it is, you're not going to live up to it. I think that's the underlying feeling, right?
That's the key, right? Like it's meant to leave certain people out of it on purpose, right?
Right.
Yeah. I guess one of the questions I had written down here is like, how do you navigate raising children with empathy and critical awareness without ever overwhelming them about the world?
Yeah.
Which we've kind of discussed on some level already, but.
Well, I think it's a super, super powerful question, because one of the most important things that you can make sure of is to separate out your own anxieties from the possible future that your kids have, right? I think that it is very easy for us to take this feeling of, I don't know, like constant loss and setbacks, and I don't know, like
Yeah.
One disaster story after another, and the fact that things can be so bleak, I just think it's really imperative that we don't pass that along. It's a big psychological task to not pass it on, and it's a sacrifice because, like, sometimes you'll be overriding your emotions because they're simply not appropriate to share.
Right.
But I think that, the notion of prefigurative politics is really important for me, especially like at home, because if you live and relate as though the revolution has already happened and that you're treating each other as though exploitation and profit seeking is just bizarre and antiquated and who would want to do that, I think that sets up a good, a good situation. Good. Right.
Yeah.
I also think that a kind of organic existentialism is good. Like, I'm not sure with our kids how or why this happened, but both of them had a lot of early questions about death and dying, about being nothing, about the void. And, we sat with those questions and we didn't make up any answers. We didn't downplay our own vulnerability. We kind of used reassurance to not say everything is going to be okay, but to say that we're all here together with these problems. And I think that realizing that you're going to die and making that an open sort of part of the home conversation and squaring up with that is really key to recognizing that, that we can weather a lot of different conditions if we're together. If you come up against a social process that is devastating or deadly, that's within the same category of what you've already dealt with regard to your own personhood, right? And the choices that you make in relation to both situations are going to rhyme. Like, if you recognize the shortness and volatility of life personally or collectively, or hopefully both, you're just going to be forced, I think, to make the most generous choices because nothing else makes sense to do, It's
interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking I might be accidentally teaching my kids to be pretty cynical about things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that okay, I think the answer to that, I think it's easy to do, right?
Right.
And I remember, oh man, I think one of the worst sort of overshares that I had with one of the kids was, it was right after, it was a few weeks after October the 7th.
Okay.
And I think that the elder one is 12 or 11 at this point.
Okay.
And there was a story circulating all over that the IDF had gone in and found beheaded babies in a particular kibbutz. And I had this thought that I didn't want him to come across this story and be confused. And I don't know why I kind of fixated on it, because I assumed that he would be exposed to it at some point. Like, this is what the horrible Hamas people are doing.
Right.
And so we're in the car and I said, hey, have you heard anything about the attack on October the 7th and how Israel has responded to it and how it's escalating into kind of like a full-on, collective punishment, genocide thing? He wasn't that aware of it.
Okay.
And he was slightly aware of it. And I said, I just wanted to, let you know that if you hear any sort of really extreme stories about what's happening there, like, just kind of maybe come to me with it, or hang fire before you make any sort of hard decisions about what you're actually hearing, because there's a lot of like propaganda and misinformation.
Right.
And these are common things that we've spoken about. But then he said, well, like what? And I'm like,
now I have to say it.
I know, but I did, but I said it, I described a little bit of it, and then it was just, it felt so horrible. It was like, why did you have to tell me that? Like, I wasn't hearing about it. And so it was this very weird moment where I was sort of hyper vigilant over being protective with regard to a certain kind of information. But in order to like be protective, I had to disclose it. And then in disclosing it, it was actually really disruptive and unnecessary. And yeah, like just no, like, so anyway, I'm a lot more patient generally about letting the kid come to me with, the thing that's potentially disturbing. And they're very good about that. They're really great about it. So I trust them. I don't have to telegraph stuff in advance.
Yeah, that's good. I think I have a tendency to like be like I can be a gruff guy sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Where like they'll tell me something that they learned or heard from somewhere, and I'm going, that bullshit. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean that can work in some family cultures if it's not taken too seriously. But like, I know that moment where like, oh, come on, where did you get that garbage, or what's coming into this house, or whatever. But like, I try, I bet you do too. But what I try to do is like, yeah, it's pretty interesting that people think stuff like that, or like, yeah, there's a lot of stories that people tell about X, and then hopefully it opens a conversation about like, okay, well, why do people tell stories? Where are they coming from? Like, what do stories serve? What kind of stuff does that like? So, it's like finding a gap between, okay, so I'm listening to misinformation and I'm going to say, fuck off misinformation, to like, oh, misinformation is kind of interesting, right? Like, why? How does that function? And so, I mean, so much of parenting is like that, right? Where, are you, do we have time to make space between the reaction and the sort of like the zoom out? Yeah,
it's tough. It is. Like I say, I can be a gruff guy sometimes. It's part of my work culture and stuff, and like a lot of the masculinity stuff that I still have to work on unpacking, actually. Right. So it comes out in these kind of like dismissive ways sometimes, but it's not, those are deep instincts, right? Like, and they're protective, and I was talking with an amazing musician named Nathan Evans Fox, who said this wonderful thing about like how in his, working class Appalachian culture that, being gruff and being generous come from the same muscle, right? Like, because they both come out of like knowing that you've got to like protect your own, or feeling like you have to, you not just feeling, but understanding that if you don't, sort of really push something away, it can be harmful. But the sort of flip side of that is that you're always bringing your people close, right? Yeah. Yeah, I like that, actually.
Right. Yeah,
it makes it seem less aggressive, I guess.
Well, I mean, I don't know what you're describing really, but I mean, I think there are good ways of examining that in ourselves, and and of course we're all trying to be more patient.
Yeah, I have down here too, like, do you think men, especially those of us who are raising children, like what kind of like political re-education do we need? And I guess this kind of plays into it some level, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, the first thing to, I think, recognize, and this is even maybe before gender, is that like power is real between people, and and most people have sort of lost their analysis of power. I mean, the notion of even things like class struggle has been propagandized out of people by like 40 years of neoliberalism. And so there's a lot of confusion I find with folks who really kind of believe that the world is this like open sandbox, and you live and die by how well you play the game, but not according to the rules that other people make or how other people control resources. I mean, one thing that I try to do with my kids about, and this is swinging around to emotional maturity because I think it's about transparency and power. I try to have an open conversation about how we get and spend money, and who profits from that, and how do various players manipulate that. And I think this is like pretty fruitful for dispelling this kind of baseline attitude of neutrality towards power, towards corporations and the state. Another, I think, analysis that's helpful for emotional maturity and with regard to power is that we'll discuss who the cops are, right? Or what cops are for. And this recently, I was driving with my younger kid is autistic, and he's looking out the passenger side, and in this field, I didn't see it, but way out beyond my line of sight, he sees this guy like ragdolled on the grass, and his dog is sitting near him. And like he says to me, we should stop the car and go help him. And so we did. And so my kid got this experience of relating to a guy in crisis. We were talking about, away from him, we're talking about mental health or substance issues, just mean that you need care. They don't mean that you're a bad person or undeserving of anything. But then the power conversation comes up around whether we should call for help, right? And whether the police are going to come. And if the police come, what they would do. And I mean, an ambulance showed up, everything was okay, but all the way home, we got to talk about who the police are, like not as individual bad guys, but as a force of orderliness, whether they're trained to care for people, whether they're trained to care about people in crisis at all, or whether their primary job is to like keep everything running for capitalism without too many disturbances. And so we take this all the way into discussing, all cops are bastards and what that really means, that in times of stress, the police are beholden to stand on the side of the powerful, right? So I think power, like discussing power, is really makes the emotional maturity a lot more palpable, I think, because then you kind of know, I think, what you're up against and what it feels like to lose in relation to power. And then the next part of it for me is that if you can really sort of see that clearly, you have access to sadness and grief, because they will sort of they'll balance out the feeling of shock or reactivity that comes when you don't have an analysis of power, right? When you don't actually, you're like, wow, why did that police officer do that to me? I'm like, come on, what do you think is going on here? You can actually be sad about the state of the world instead of like shocked at how it's going, right? So I think that, letting myself feel sad, and then, being very clear that that's how I feel, when my kids are around and they can see it, that provides a lot of relief from anxiety and this feeling of just sort of having to hold everything together.
I quite like that. I guess in my own way, I have taught my kids that it is okay to be sad about various things like that. But also I was trained to hold it in, right? So I do a lot of that still too, but
so do you have any like strategies for like not doing that for periods of time? Like, is there anything that you take yourself out and do where you're like, okay, I can feel sad, or if I feel safe enough to feel sad now?
There used to be like, I'd have like actually a playlist of like specific songs that I would listen to, and I would let myself be sad during those moments and listening to those songs. And you think about like the things that are making you sad at that time. Right.
It's so important. I think that's a really, really like important thing to do.
It wasn't even, it wasn't, I wouldn't even say it was that long ago, like maybe
Yeah.
4 years ago, that I started like really actually even acknowledging that as an emotion that I had.
It's wild, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
It's wild
It's,
because like you were a little boy at some point. There was tears. There were things that were deeply sad. Whatever you've lost, or whatever pain you've been through, that's all there. And then how old do you have to be before you say, oh wow, okay, what's this feeling here?
what's this feeling I've been ignoring for forever?
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, burning a hole in me.
I actually I was reading your book today at the gym in between sets, and I had a couple things pop up on me
Yeah,
that I thought I would like to bring this up during their conversation.
yeah.
You're talking about your kids and how they interact with the capitalism and how they felt a little bit of like guilt
Oh
about
yeah,
like about existing within capitalism and feeling like they might have some complicity in it.
yeah. I think this is huge. That you every kid who has the fortune or misfortune to be around people like us is going to, like, at a certain point say, where is this stuff coming from, or who made it, or
Right.
or where is the plastic going to go when I'm done with it, or like, how long will this piece of Lego exist at the bottom of the sea? Like, there's every kid will have to come to grips with that, and it will be very nauseating, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a tendency in some progressive discourses to really lean into, we were just talking about the value of sadness, but you can take that overboard, right? Like, you can
Right.
go into a kind of feeling of intense self-criticism
Mm-hmm.
that kind of it actually works in the favor of capital for you to believe that the problems of the environment or of global inequality can be individualized, can be something that
Yeah.
you can sort of, obsess about. Like, if you were a better person, they would get better. Like, they love that. That's perfect for them, because of course that's not going to change anything.
Right.
um so so somehow rising up to be able to accept this paradox of living within a materialist and consumerist society that you can't really change when you're 9 or 12 or 16, but you can study in preparation for the possibility that you're going to figure out some other way of organizing production or your social relations.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important bridge, because it's there's a pocket in which this happens in another place too, which is around white cisgendered boys, for example, being introduced to the idea of white privilege, for example.
Right.
There's a way in which understanding the surface level of what this is can make you really feel like crap, can make you really feel like, oh, I am personally a huge problem. And
Right.
that emphasis upon, your own individual responsibility is actually, that's not healthy, because the only way out of any of these things is by working with other people, is by changing the structures that are actually making them run.
Yeah.
And I'll just throw out another name here. Maybe you're aware of. There's a lot of people like this in this category, but somebody like Robin DiAngelo will describe,
Yeah.
white privilege almost relentlessly as a kind of internal psychological
Right.
stressor that you must always be wrestling with in order to purify yourself from. And so there's a very sort of religious aspect to it, where you're never going to be quite clean enough, you're never going to be quite
Right.
sort of like we're not even really looking at your behaviors anymore. We're looking at like, what are your internal feelings?
Yeah, we're looking at
and
the core of your being now.
Which is impossible for anybody to suss out. But it becomes the kind of thing where the person, the kid in this case, feels more sort of personally embroiled than structurally engaged, and I think that's not a good situation. It's a I think that you do have to deal with the feelings of guilt and shame that arise when you realize that you have food and somebody else doesn't. You have to deal with survivor's guilt when you realize that you've just watched, people get, bombed in another country on your phone. You have to deal with the horrible absurdities of global inequality just in your awareness, and you will feel bad about all of those things. You will feel terrible, and that means that you're human. But then to focus on your sort of personal psychology as a way out of these conditions it's mismatched. It's not the same category.
It makes me think of like there was a while back now where I was thinking of like somebody framed anti-racism as like the liberal view of anti-racism is like, I have grown beyond racism.
Yes,
versus like the systemic analysis of it.
Right, exactly. Right. And I think what D'Angelo is saying is that no, you've never actually grown beyond it, right?
Right.
Actually, and let's keep the focus on that problem. Actually, have you personally ever grown beyond it, right? And that's not ultimately where the problem gets fixed, I don't think.
No, I think that's right. It was kind of funny a little bit when I was reading this section, because you mentioned something about why do we want a particular device or experience or piece of clothing or even a particular type of body?
Yeah.
And it made me think of like when I first started, because I've been in and out of bodybuilding. I as a gym goer,
right,
since I was 35 years old or 33 years old or something.
Right.
And early in my interest in that, I read somebody who was like a pro who said like, the moment you don't hate your body is the moment you're done as a bodybuilder.
Oh my God. Well, that's very honest.
Yeah.
Holy mackerel. Like, that hits hard, eh?
Yeah. So, and at the time I did hate my body, and I adopted that view of myself. So like this like internalization, this hatred of the things that we do as an individual, rather than viewing them as part of the world, as part of the system we're in. I guess it's two kind of conflicting kind of viewpoints in a sense. Yeah.
Well, and certainly this realizing, being so frank about, okay, well, you're being driven on by self-loathing here. You're being driven on by dissatisfaction. I mean, that's like a skeleton key for unlocking capitalism, right? Like that's a skeleton key for figuring out, how else am I doing that, right? Like how else am I driving myself forward based upon a whole bunch of conditioning that, I don't actually buy.
The need to accumulate, the need to just own stuff and dominate others, and like it's all part of that, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So the start of chapter 1, you talk about the pace of things and how we all are in a hurry, and I know you kind of expand it to almost like an avoidance of our existential dread.
Yeah.
But the way you talk about it in the first bit about how many times do you say, oh, well, hurry up, we got to get going. You got to get on you got to match the schedule.
Right.
Like I do that like every day, trying to get the girls to the bus. Like,
right. Yeah.
It's like, go. We got to keep going. We got to go faster.
Yeah.
It's just always there. Right.
Yeah. I hope in sort of like recording that, it doesn't make people feel bad about the condition that they find themselves in, but that to just sort of provide a snapshot of what it means for what would otherwise be a fairly self-regulated and organic life to be under pressure from these external forces that, provide some benefit and some structure and some protection, but ultimately feed into this sort of like rolling train towards the cliff.
Right.
And I think that, it's also, I should really just sort of note my own privilege here in that being able to focus on the speed of things like that is really kind of enhanced and highlighted by the fact that, we have to homeschool one of our kids, right? And so, it's very common for us to think about how we're organizing time in a way that's different from everybody else getting packed off, and so there is some, there's a real advantage there that I don't want to, like abuse or anything like that.
Right.
It's really much more of this contrast between what you're being forced to do by these external conditions of productivity and time management, and what you feel your actual real life would otherwise be, right? I think noting the difference, and perhaps even like the pain of the difference between those two things is probably like a real revolutionary provocation, right?
So my work is 7 days on, 7 days off.
Oh,
so I work for a week, and I'm on this constant treadmill, right?
Yeah.
That everybody else is on. But then for a week, I get like to do things mostly on my schedule.
Right.
And it gives me like, in a way that I think a lot of people who work 5 days a week don't get,
right,
a perspective on time that,
so that works, right? You have two lives, actually.
That's right. Like I actually get a work-life balance that other people don't get.
It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was thinking too, like my partner, like she's from Burundi, and she often talks about how this obsession with being on time that we have in Canada is kind of nonsense.
Right.
Like to her, like,
right.
What do you mean you show up at 5 minutes before you have to be there?
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, yeah, let's hear it for different times, man.
Yeah. Like, I guess it speaks to a certain cultural difference, but also like, maybe we should all be able to relax a little bit more.
Yeah.
Actually enjoy that.
I mean, what else do you have, right? What else do you have but your time? And it's so easy for it to be appropriated, and to be taken. And I think it's really disorienting when you realize, you're actually participating, right? Like somehow you've been encouraged to speed up the treadmill, right?
Yeah.
And so
I was talking to somebody that I do regular recordings with yesterday, Owen, and we were talking about education.
Yeah.
And he recently did like a debate with a anti-Trump Republican on the subject of education.
Right.
And the idea was that schools don't need more money.
Right.
Parents need to take more responsibility.
Right.
And he said they did the math, and like everybody has like most people have maybe 6 hours a day that they're not at work.
Right.
And not sleeping.
Right.
And somehow you're supposed to fit all these, extra roles and responsibilities into that 6 hours.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's nuts. So loosening up around time, playing more games, and then really, like for me at the end of the day, trying to like fully, I think that I was talking with Ben Case, who's a scholar of like anti-fascist street action and street rebellion, and he was saying that fascism puts us in this situation way too often where we have to flex these muscles of hypervigilance and protection, and that's really good. We should train for that, and also if it's overused, we can get injured. And I mean, that from your gym life, right? If you're just too tight on your politics all the time, you're not really going to, because they're for something. They're for the time and love of the family or the community. That's and so right. I try to do as much sort of completely empty space around contemplating just how great the kids are, or how incredible my partner is, or like how much I miss my mom who died 4 years ago, and how much I feel her around me. And so I try to break those very rapid cycles of time and productivity with as much contemplation as I can manage. That's always helpful.
For sure. Well, it's been an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I guess. Thanks so much for your time. Where can people find the book, and where can people find you?
Well, I am on Instagram under my own name. It's Matthew Remski with an underscore. I'm also on TikTok at Antifascist Dad, and on YouTube at that as well. So, but in any of those bylines, you'll find a connection to the pre-order link for the book, which comes out in April. But then if you go to your podcast server and you put in Antifascist Dad, you'll see my podcast there, and all of the episodes are up. And yeah, it's great to talk with you, Corey.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. It was really fun.
All right.